Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight online and in person for the Westfield PFAS Community Health Survey First Community Meeting. I'm Kristen Mello, co-founder and director of WRAFT. You also know I'm an elected city councilor at large, but at these events, I never ever speak for the city of Westfield. I only speak for myself and sometimes for WRAFT. Joining us tonight is also Rafter Chris Clark, back from Michigan. Thank you very much, everyone. We're so glad to have you here. He will be manning the Zoom. Participants, if you have a problem, tag Chris, type in the chat, Zoom on the Q&A, raise your hand, make a ruckus, okay? With us tonight, we have Dr. Wendy Heiger-Bernays. She's here from UMASS, Lowell, and BU. We have brought her here to help us with some technical assistance with a health survey. We are super grateful that she took the time to drive all the way out here on such a warm day. I thought it was going to rain and it wouldn't be so warm, and it turns out this room gets so sunny. But thank you so much for being with us and for taking the time to come out. So WRAFT stands for Westfield Residents Advocating for Themselves, and our mission is to provide education and advocacy for the residents affected by the pollution of our natural resources. Most of you know that in 2017, in February, on a very cold night, we met in my living room and decided that we needed to do something about this PFAS contamination, that people were not advocating for us, and we were going to do it for ourselves. And we've been doing that ever since. And now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Heiger-Bernays so that she can talk to us about PFAS, where they come from, how we're exposed, and then we're going to talk about what we're going to do about it. So join me in welcoming Wendy.
All right. All right. So first of all, thank you very much for inviting me here. It's been a pleasure to work with Kristen and Chris. We met years and years ago. I'll tell you a little bit about myself later on. But for now, we're going to start with just a little bit of information about PFAS, which I'm fairly certain could do this. But as we wrote this proposal, we decided to sort of go soup to nuts, right? So what we've learned about PFAS over the past almost 15 years. In fact, we've been studying PFAS since it was called not PFAS, but PFCs. So it's been a long time. We know that there are many sources of PFAS. On the left side, the slide comes from the Toxics Use Reduction Institute, which is part of actually a law that we have here in Massachusetts. It's called the Toxics Use Reduction Act. And that act establishes the Toxics Use Reduction Institute, whose goal it is to decrease the use of highly toxic substances in Massachusetts. And it focuses almost sort of starts with workplace and goes beyond to environment. And the thought there is that if you can remove toxic chemicals from the environment while they're being used, you won't have to deal as much with cleaning them up later on. Very wise. Okay. So left side shows many of the sources of PFAS that you have perhaps been reading about, and in our carpets, in our furniture, in food packaging, sort of everywhere we look, we find PFAS. The right side of the slide, we have something that I can't see the top of because the floating thing is sticking in front of it.
Sorry.
But they're probably
Industrial
sources of PFAS, specifically waterproofing industries that put the coating on materials, on textiles, electronic coatings, resins, firefighting foam, fume suppressant. There are a number of industries that rely heavily on the use of PFAS. Next slide, please. So when we think about public health, right, it's about what's out there in the environment and what is it that we're concerned about because it moves from our environment into ourselves, right? So we think of that as sort of the focus of exposure assessment. And we focus on this because we want to understand those key exposure sources. And what we've learned over the years is that some of the key exposure sources in New England include firefighting foam, right? Textile coating manufacturers. We also know that as a result of some of these uses, the PFAS moves in the environment into the groundwater, into surface water, resulting in contamination of drinking water supplies, both surface water and groundwater. We also know from studies that have been well established, right, that the movement of that PFAS into the environment results in contamination of wildlife, including fish. And we think about exposure. One route of exposure might be through consumption of contaminated fish. And we also have been studying biosolids, namely what happens after you flush the toilet, where does it go, right? It goes to a wastewater treatment plant. And the wastewater treatment plant, there's two products. One is a liquid, usually gets discharged into rivers and streams, and the others are solids. And those biosolids or sludge contain high concentrations of PFAS. So we've learned an awful lot about some of the sources that are really important for human exposure to PFAS. And there are many other sources that may not be as important. They may not be as important in terms of how much PFAS and how people are exposed. Next slide, please. So exposure is one thing, right? It's out there, it's going to get into our bodies. And really the question is, how does it get into our bodies? And we think about typically three key pathways or routes of exposure: inhalation, dermal contact, and ingestion. And when we think about water, right, we think about drinking contaminated water. We also think about dermal contact while we shower. And we also think about what happens when we consume, for example, the PFAS containing fish, or we actually might inhale or ingest or come into contact with some of the dust in our homes, in our schools, in our buildings that contain PFAS as a result of moving from the furniture into the environment. Next slide. So with that, we know that there are multiple sources of PFAS. There are multiple ways that the PFAS can get into our bodies, but we have to prioritize what those are. And we usually do those on the basis of understanding what's out in the environment and what is contributing most to which community, which population. And if we look at this, one of the things in common is that at the end of the day, we can measure the PFAS in all of these things and all of these sources. But once it gets into the body, the PFAS travels to the serum, right, to the blood. And it's in the blood because of the properties of the PFAS. But one thing we don't yet know, and we are working to try and figure out, is what is the contribution of the serum, of the PFAS in the serum from drinking water and from these other sources. And what we do know is that in communities where there is a substantial contamination of drinking water, that is one of, if not the major source of exposure. Next slide. Okay, so I've been talking about PFAS like it's a one thing. Well, it's not one thing, right? So we learned a lot about one PFAS, one per polyfluoroalkyl substance from work that was done in West Virginia at DuPont, where we learned that there was one sort of the granddaddy of the PFAS molecules. That was PFOA, right? And we'll talk a little bit about that. But the PFOA was only the beginning. That was one chemical. From that chemical, industry manufactured many different types of PFAS. And they all have at least one thing in common. They all have organofluorine molecules, organofluorine atoms, and they usually have carbon. And they come in many flavors. And I'll let Kristen talk about this because she loves to talk about the chemistry.
Okay, so I promise you, and there are Smarties over there if anybody feels the need to get a little sugar high. There's one chemistry slide, only one, okay? We are going to talk about a particular kind of PFAS, right? There are thousands and thousands and thousands of kinds of PFAS, thousands of distinct chemicals, even more if depending on how you define them, right? But we're going to talk about one. We're going to talk about PFOA, and it is perfluoroalkyl carboxylic acid. So this is the slide we always do. Okay, we're going to start by talking about an alkane, right? An 8-carbon alkane. And an alkane just means that it's carbons and hydrogens and there's no special fancy bonds. It's just a linear carbon compound with a bunch of hydrogen. And you all know it because you put it in your car. On the left, that's octane, right? That's oct means 8. It's 8 carbons. Everywhere you can make another bond, there's a hydrogen on it. Very simple, okay? It's oily. It likes to be in oil. It doesn't want to be with water. It's gasoline, right? Your octane. Now, if you take the carbon on the end and you rip off 2 of the hydrogens with 3 of the hydrogens, right? You make a double bond with an oxygen and then a single bond with a hydroxyl group. You can have what's called a carboxylic acid, right? And so when you have that carboxylic group on the end of octane, you make octanoic acid, right? Because chemists are very logical and we're not really getting crazy with our naming. We're going to name it the way you write it, okay? And so you've got that same straight chain carbon, but you've got this group at the end, and that's called a functional group. It's at the head of the carbon chain, and the rest of the carbons that have the hydrogens on them, that's called the tail. And it is the functional group of this molecule that allows it to interact with other things. Now, essentially, carboxylic acid, some of them you've seen like a GNC. These are essential fatty acids. They're used in cellular metabolism. They're used in your cell walls where, you know, your functional groups stick to polar things like water, and then the tails all form together and they stick together. And so you've got this group at the end that allows you to grab things, and all the tails hang out together and they don't let anybody nearby. So if you could wave a magic wand and take all the hydrogens off of your octanoic acid and replace them with fluorine, you would get PFOA, right? You can't wave a magic wand. It takes a lot of energy and a lot of man-made chemical science to remove those hydrogens and add the fluorine. But because it very much looks like and acts like that essential fatty acid, that carboxylic acid, when your body sees the PFOA, it kind of treats it a little bit the same. And so when they look for PFOA in your blood and in your body, they find it almost everywhere, right? They find it in your tissue, in your bone, in your blood, in your organs, in your brain. They find them all over because that's how your body handles them. That's the whole chemistry bit. You're done now. Right? So our PFAS contamination in our drinking water, the majority of it, right? And I mean, nobody's examined everything, but the bulk of it, just like in all the other places with the military base and PFAS contamination, came from fire training. And you remember back in 2016, right? The water ratepayers received letters in the mail. The renters did not. The water ratepayers came to me and said, Kristen, what are these chemicals? What is this all about? And when people first came, I said, well, I'll look it up, but if it was dangerous, it would be regulated, right? Somebody's in charge of this. Where's the EPA? Right? I didn't know I was supposed to laugh. I thought someone was minding the store, right? I didn't know, right? But so what was the first thing we did, right? Well, the first thing I did was call the water department. And what did they tell me to do? Well, they said call DEP. They keep all the records.
Right. So I'll give you a little bit more about that UCMR3 thing, right? So stand here.
Closer
Okay.
to the mic.
Okay, sorry. So that UCMR3 on the previous slide right, is actually called the unregulated contaminant monitoring rule. And that is the rule that is supposed to be, that is followed, where it tells EPA there's a bunch of stuff that scientists, usually academic scientists, have been finding in drinking water. And it would be good to go out and collect some more data on those chemicals. And so those under that UCMR3 are those chemicals that are unregulated, right? And so that's where we got all this information about those particular PFAS that were measured here in Westfield and across the Commonwealth, and actually across large public water supplies across the country. So then what happened was that information, those data are housed, right, at the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection, because that's where regulation of public water supplies happens. Private water supplies, different story. Perhaps another day. Okay, so there are places where we can go, the public can go to find information and data. And often we don't even know where to go, right? And so this is something called the Energy and Environmental Affairs Data Portal. And it's been set up online so that residents and others, researchers, can go and find information and data about environmental samples, right? There are no health samples analyses in this portal, but there are environmental samples. And so those data are organized by something called the RTN on the left side.
Yep, they're over here.
Okay. All right. So these are tracking numbers. And every location where there is hazardous material has a tracking number. And that tracking number is sort of your identification, right? It's sort of like your social security number. For that contamination, that gets tracked through this tracking number. And so as a result of that tracking and gathering of information, a number of investigations have been done here in Westfield. And over the course of this project, we'll talk about some of those investigations, how to look at those data, and how to interpret them for yourselves. Okay, next slide, please. So I want to go back to the water, right? Because that's what we're talking about here in Westfield. Right? And one of the things I want to mention that we'll be discussing as we go through this project is that measuring PFAS in water is hard to do. The laboratory, for example, that measures, the beach water at the local freshwater recreational area is not qualified to measure PFAS in a way that gives you reliable data. And I mention this because often there are not such reputable organizations that might seek to come to you to collect water or to analyze your water. So it's always important to use something called a certified laboratory, and we'll be talking about what that is. That laboratory is certified for a specific analysis, and the results of those analyses will be above board, if you will, and will be comparable across all laboratories that are certified. So there are two key pieces here when we measure PFAS in water. One is called the reporting limits. And the reporting limits are the lowest amount of PFAS that is measured at that laboratory from that sample on that day. Okay, and so we want to make sure that our reporting limits are low enough to draw conclusions. And I'll just leave it at that. I'm a board of health member in my community. And one of the hardest things, I think, for us to convey is that when you get samples back that say 0, there's no such thing as 0, right? It's not 0. It's whatever that laboratory can report, right? It's something, it's that level, or if it's higher than that, they'll give you a number. If it's lower than that, it's not 0. It's something that that laboratory is not able to measure. So that's something to keep in mind, particularly if we are comparing those concentrations with numbers that are either higher or lower. So 0 doesn't exist. It might be non-detect, but it's not 0. Okay. Then the last thing I just want to put out there is Kristen mentioned that there were thousands of PFAS. We don't measure all of the PFAS. We measure a handful of well, we can measure dozens of PFAS, but we don't measure them all with the methods that are used for water routinely from those certified laboratories. So it's important for us to understand what we can measure, how much we can measure, and how that compares with what we might call either regulatory standards or levels that researchers have found where effects might be associated with consumption of that water. Next slide. Okay, so shall I turn it to you? Okay, so I'm going to tell you a little story. I got involved with WRAFT many years ago, and it was shortly after this WRAFT had Westfield had been participated in one of the ATSDR, the Centers for Disease Control Exposure Assessment Study. So CDC, you've heard of CDC from our COVID experience. Okay, and CDC has multiple branches, and one part of CDC is ATSDR, or the Agency for Toxic Substances Disease Registry. That actually was part of the organization was founded many, many, many years ago. And it was founded because EPA's original mission was to protect the environment. There wasn't anybody home at EPA who was mandated to protect public health. And so Congress established ATSDR as sort of the sister organization to EPA to focus initially on documenting diseases that might be associated with exposure to contaminants in the environment. And then over the years, ATSDR sort of took on its own sort of trajectory, but ATSDR was the organization, the governmental organization that was selected, if you will, to get a better handle on what people's exposure to PFAS looked like, particularly in communities that had high concentrations of PFAS in their drinking water, as shown by that UCMR analysis. So Westfield won the jackpot there.
We did. We were
Yeah,
lucky.
you did. You were lucky, right? So many of us were involved in various proposals, and Westfield got to participate. And in September 2019, you may recall that ATSDR collected samples and other information from residents in Westfield. And if I get this wrong, let me know.
I'll tell you.
Okay. And well, the data that ATSDR collected, your serum, they analyzed for the presence of multiple PFAS chemicals, including those that we know are from the firefighting foam. Now, when ATSDR reports those data, the data that they report, they do it in a way such that they compare the results on a population basis, right? And they'll say all the people in Westfield had a range of PFAS levels in their blood, and they range from this level to this level. And we're going to compare that with the national average, because we have another way of looking at unaffected or less affected communities. And so by providing information in the context of, let's look at your serum levels, right, in comparison with the national average, national levels, we can gain some information, but it doesn't give you the information that you need to talk about your levels and what that means with regard to your exposure and health and potential for health outcomes, adverse health outcomes.
Yep. And the only thing I would add is that they only sampled half the city,
Yes.
right? They only sampled the north side of the city. And by the way, Westfield, you blew away in participation every other site. I'm just saying, y'all made the stats work. You guys, like this community rolled out 459 participants when they were only looking for 400.
Yeah.
Y'all pulled it out. Just saying. Sorry, that's my adding.
Okay. So that's great. You got some information, you know something about where one side of Westfield residents, some 400 and something, look in terms of your serum levels of PFAS.
Yep. But then what happened with that information, Wendy? What did we do with it? We didn't do anything with it.
We didn't do
Why didn't we do anything with it?
Didn't do anything with it.
Oh no.
So, yes, so there have been many, I'm gonna say many challenges. I'm gonna keep even keel here. You can't get me. All right, so, yes, so this information came out, and then there was another call for another health study. This one was gonna be a national health study, which was gonna take the exposure assessment, which is the level of PFAS in people's bloods, and was then going to associate, right? Make links between levels of PFAS in serum and frequency of adverse outcomes or disease. Okay, you didn't win that lottery.
We did not win that.
We did not win that lottery either. So anyway, but what did happen was, as a result of WRAFT and other communities and leaders, right, there was a hard push for the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. So we call those the biggest brains in the country. When you have a really hard problem, you go to NASEM and you say, we want you to convene a panel and we want you to answer these really hard questions. So NASEM was contacted, and I won't go through how that happens, but nonetheless, there were a series of workshops. And included in the series of workshops was this question of, what does it mean if we have this level of PFAS in our serum? What does that mean for our health risk? What does that mean for what we should do? What does it mean for what we're concerned about? And oh, by the way, clinicians, this is real. And oh, by the way, clinicians, this is something that you need to be paying attention to, because we have good evidence that there's good science that show that at certain levels of PFAS, there are an increase in frequency in a number of diseases. Okay, so National Academy convenes this workshop. Some people that we know participated.
Mighty yelled.
Mighty yelled.
Mighty
And
yelled.
one of the things I'm going to talk, so a couple things came out of that. One, I will say that in New England, we have something called a PACU, a pediatric PACU, Pediatric Environmental Health Specialty Unit. Anybody ever heard of a PACU? Okay, we have such a thing.
I did.
Yeah, I know. So there are 10 PACUs across the country, and they generally follow the same pattern. In other words, we're region 1 for EPA, we're region 1 for CDC, we're region 1 for our PACU. So their PASU is actually located at Harvard. It's located within a group of pediatricians, which is great. And that PASU did phenomenal work a million years ago on children's exposure to lead and did great work decreasing lead exposure. It had been silent, and in fact, it had actively, shall we say, poo-pooed the relationship between PFAS and disease. And one thing that this NASEM panel did was to make sure that clinicians, physicians, nurses, clinical care people begin to recognize that there are a suite of diseases and conditions that might be associated with exposure to PFAS, some more definitely than others. Another piece that came out of this is some interpretation of those serum levels. And there were 3 levels that were recognized. Or we'll call it low, medium, and high. And what the panel did was to say, let's use that information to guide some recommendations. So if you fall into the high level, right, the recommendation is, we need to figure out what the major source is, and we need to decrease exposure to that source, which isn't always easy. And then on the bottom end, right, are the lowest levels, which pretty much cover the general United States, right? And in that case, nothing to do here, nothing to say here. Now, the lowest level doesn't mean that there's no association with disease. It means that at the lowest level, right, the epidemiological studies have not been, shall we say, crystal clear. So what we got out of that was a recommendation for clinicians and for people, residents, to say, if you knew what your serum levels were, you might be able to, you would fit into one of these categories, and there would be some recommendations for biomonitoring, for example. If you had high levels, you might be biomonitoring, for some early stages of a variety of health conditions. And so that's very, very useful. So that was what came out of the NASEM, but it only considered a tiny fraction of PFAS, and it looked only at human studies. It didn't actually consider the animal studies, right? So there's still significant gaps there. But in a community like Westfield, right, where the drinking water is documented to have and to, in many places, continue to contain elevated PFAS, right, we're sort of left. You had the exposure assessment. You have the evidence from NASEM. You have the evidence from what you hear and what you read that EPA recognizes a series of disease conditions, right, that are associated with PFAS. But it's really hard for people, regular people, to make connections and to also have their questions answered if they have questions, and also to report some of their concerns, right? So there's good stuff going on, but it's not enough. It's not enough at the local level. So that is why Kristen saw an opportunity, which was to apply for a TAG grant or TAG. A TAG is a technical assistance grant. And a TAG is administered by the Mass Department of Environmental Protection, and specifically the Bureau of Waste Site Cleanup. And remember, we're going back to the RTN, right? Westfield has an RTN. It has a tracking number. It has all the information and data associated with that contaminated site, which is what makes it qualifies Westfield for this award. Okay. This is
We put the slide
We
in.
stuck it in. Yeah. Anyway, I'm okay, right? Okay. So I do a lot of work on contaminated sites and a lot of work on PFAS. And I do a lot of work with communities, and I do a lot of teaching. And I think that's why you asked me to be here.
That's right.
That's asked me to be here. And so I am taking the lead here on this tag, but I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, uh, Ani Bello. Ani Bello is also with me at UMass Lowell. Ani Bello is an exposure assessor, and she works almost entirely on uh, uh, AAA on the AFFF, the firefighting foam, and exposures to both firefighters and military workers. So she knows a great deal about PFAS from the AFFF. And she also is well aware of the epidemiology and the science. So, and there's a lovely photo of Chris and Ani and Kushal, who is the fellow in the center. Kushal is the doctoral student who works with Ani and Demeter Bello in the laboratory. And he's the one who's analyzing samples for PFAS. Okay. So the tag goes to you, it goes to WRAFT, right? And it's where WRAFT can do what it needs to do and get some technical support to do that. And so the objective of the goal of this tag project, right, is to fill in some of the gaps that the agencies that the agencies have left. And so really the goal of this is to conduct a PFAS community health survey. And it can't be done without, it's done by WRAFT, and it can't be done without participants. And the purpose of that is to identify your concerns, whether about health, your children's health, your parents' health, issues that are causing persistent contamination related stress, so other stressors, and resources for recovery and protection from ongoing future contamination. So what that means is your health conditions, your concerns, other concerns that are related to ongoing contamination, and also what resources might exist, right, to get out of this mess. And so this project will provide PFAS education, and will use the information that is gathered to guide education, guide information that might be useful, that will be useful to you, we hope, and also to compile data on the concerns that haven't yet been heard beyond probably the walls of, I don't know where, Westfield. maybe.
Or our phones. Yeah.
phones.
Yeah. Like
Or your phones.
ever since this started, we have heard stories about, oh, we all have the same thyroid doctor, or, oh, this person had this illness. Is it related? We don't know without a study. But if you have these questions, we want to begin to collate those questions to find the answers. And so we have to start somewhere. And so we're starting by asking the residents, what is it you're worried about? What is it you're suffering with? Are you worried about your private well? Are you worried about your garden? Are you worried? What's giving you stress about this? Are you totally fine? Are you like, oh, it's handled and I'm fine, we're all back to our normal life? If you're not, let's talk about it. Let's find out what we need to get ourselves on this road to recovery, to talk about what's wrong instead of hiding everything and then feeling like I can't talk about it, or I'm going to make somebody else upset if I do talk about it. No, we need to help each other. And as long as we're all sitting alone in our houses thinking about only our family, we're not combining information in order to take action. And so that's what this survey is. We want to combine the information from all of our individual experiences and our family and neighborhood experiences and say, wait a minute, as a whole community, what's going on here? And what do we need help with? And so that, I'm sorry to like step
No,
right
that's
in there,
good.
but
That's good.
that's our goal.
I'm just here to
We
put
need,
the boundaries up.
right? Because when somebody's going to Cindy Lou Who you, and you know what I mean, when they pat you on the head and tell you not to worry about it, because they do. When somebody Cindy Lou Who's you, what we want are experts with a longer CV, right? I want somebody with a 27-page CV to come in here and say, no, wait a minute. As a matter of fact, that's not what the data says. Right? And that NASM thing, it was a big deal when it happened, because before then, if you went to your doctor and asked about PFAS, they would say, I don't have anything on that. That book went out to every public health department. That information is available to every clinician in America and outside America. And it has changed the game because we can hold it up and say, no, look at this. It's a real thing.
So here we are. Here's the timeline. It's very small. I can barely read it, but here's where we are. You're here. I love that. Okay. So what we're doing is we have a little bit less than a year to complete this work. And this work includes multiple steps. And it also includes 3 additional meetings. And we'll talk about what each step, what is happening in the project, and what you can expect. And then we can move forward. Next slide. Unless there was something you wanted to say.
No, this is everything then.
Yeah. Okay. So the project next steps include Kristen taking the lead and Chris and others in WRAFT taking a lead on development of the survey. Now, the survey will be conducted using a tool called Qualtrics. And it is not like your Google survey. It's a sort of a real thing, which has a real wall between what you enter and what people can see. And that's for privacy purposes. So that the development of that survey will also go through something called the IRB, the Institutional Review Board for UMass Lowell. And that's what's required if we, not as activists, but it's as scientists, participate or conduct surveys. And what we need to do is demonstrate to the reviewers that we're doing this in a way that protects you. It's what it's supposed to be. It minimizes risk to you. And one of the pieces of risk is release of information that you don't want to share to the rest of the world. Anything else about that before I go on?
Only that their personal identifiable information will not be.
We will not be sharing. We will be only collecting, address.
Yeah, address will be collected so that we can locate where you are in your ward and precinct, right? For the census information. Go ahead, Chris. It will come in the form of multiple questions, right? Because we need to know where you were when you were consuming the water. I've moved around Westfield quite a bit, so my answer would move. So we're going to have to make it flexible. Some people lived here and moved away and want to, we want to include that information. Some people, I grew up on the south side, but I lived on the north side for the last 15 years. So that, right, when our water was the worst, I was drinking a gallon a day on the north side. Right. So that we want to be able to capture kind of, where you were, where you are.
So we have to develop that survey. And again, that will be developed by WRAFT. And it will be reviewed through UMass Lowell. And then that survey we will also be doing, you'll be doing outreach for participant enrollment. And that outreach, just like for the ATSDR study, you got 450 people when they were only looking for 400. We're hopeful that the enrollment into the study is going to be large and that we'll be able to do some good analyses of the information that's obtained. We're also going to prepare community education materials and learning objectives so that we can fill some of the gaps that you might have or your families might have in understanding about the situation, whether it's water or it's food or it's, the levels in whatever, and what are the health effects, because we haven't spoken about them. So that will be, we'll be preparing materials and learning objectives. And then we're going to hold, our next meeting will be teaching and learning session, including you are going to look at some data, and you're going to be pleasantly surprised that looking at the data at first is like learning a new language, but we can learn that new language, and then that gives you the power, right, to understand additional reports that come out. Instead of people talking at you, they're talking with you. So,
And if you can read your own data, you know when they're lying. I'm just
I'm not
saying.
going there, but okay.
Also, we should say, no one from WRAFT is going to see your personally identifiable information. That we're going to keep it one step removed. Like, we don't want, if you want to share with us personally because we're friends or because you trust us, that's a different story. But in terms of WRAFT and UMass Lowell administering a survey, we do not want to match you with your participant number. That is not going to be something we have. We want you to feel completely comfortable filling out the survey and knowing that nobody's like, oh, this is what this person said. Not possible. It is not, we're not doing it like that. And it's not going to your insurance company. Is it nobody's getting this? And when you see it, it's going to be population based, right? It's going to be all of us said, we said this, so many percent said that. It's not about like, oh, we're going to talk about your family. We're going to talk about the community.
So I'll also provide a reference, a document that was done in another community. And that, it's a similar process. So this is not novel. It's what gets done in public health and in environmental health to learn and to participate. So what's the next step for you, right? Is we're not going to give you homework yet. Is you're going to stand by for survey enrollment announcement. No, it's summer. It's summer. And so that survey will be coming your way or be coming WRAFT's way. And we're going to share information about
they're going to share information about the survey with everybody.
About the survey with
everybody.
everybody.
We're going to network participation, right? Talk to your moms, talk to your dads, brothers, sisters, uncles, friends, bridge players. Mom, I'm talking to you if you can hear me, right? Like, right? Your clubs, your garden parties, tell everybody. Right. Everybody. And Wendy told a little bit of a fib. There's a tiny little bit of homework. There's a little bit,
I forgot.
right?
Yeah.
So that's a QR code right there at the end of this. There is a Google form. You can let us know if you liked the meeting time, if you liked the meeting place, if this presentation was helpful. Just 5 questions just to let us know how we can do better.
So let me ask you, my mom does not know how to use a QR code. I had to be taught how to use a QR code last year by one of my sons. So we take our phone and we put our phone right there and then we click on it.
I'll show you.
And miraculously on your phone is now that survey.
There you go.
are.
Right? So you just open your camera and you hold it in front of the code. And then when it reads it, it gives you a little thing with a URL. And if you click it, it'll open the website and it'll ask you 5 little questions. Now, these presentation slides will be put on the WRAFT website. So if you don't want to do it right now, you can do it later. And if you're watching a recorded version, you can do it later. We're not closing this. You could take your time. We will leave this open. We just want to know how to help better.
The other thing is when we apply for grants or for these kinds of things, we we want to make sure that those who are funding, that we can share with them that the work was effective, right? And this is a way for us to glean how useful these sessions are and the information is. So it will help RAFT in securing perhaps additional funds.
Right. And if you hate this room and only want to be in the library or whatever, you tell us, right? The very last question, there's room to tell us more things. So if you needed to start at 7 and not 6:30, if you hate Zoom and only want Microsoft Teams, talk to us. Let us know.
Boy.
I know, dude, I can't even do Teams. Don't even start with me on that.
Yes.
Interestingly, it has not spread to West Springfield under the ground, but West Springfield gets some of their water from by wells 3 and 4 over on Shaker Road, and those wells have had PFAS in them. So it is not empty of PFAS, the water.
Take the survey, right? Because when the information is analyzed, it will be analyzed based on area, on either where in Westfield do you live or did you live? And if you're not living in Westfield, right, you might respond and say, I was a school teacher in Westfield. And you lived, so absolutely, absolutely. So we would prefer to go more broadly. People participate, and then based on the information that comes in, we can decide, should this person be included or not?
For the people at home, because they can't hear you, we have a attendee who is asking like who should be involved, and what level of living here or exposure. And also we've talked about how the different levels of medicine, the level of insurance, levels of managed care, the separation between our doctors and ourselves, and finding it difficult to get assistance and help. Is that roughly in a nutshell? And you're not alone. You are, sister, you are not alone. Well, not it.
The two socialist countries. It was completely covered by national health.
That's right. Yes.
And you got sick or you to talk to somebody, you went, the government paid. Our system is so convoluted and so expensive. I'm just appalled when I think that we're supposed to be a developed country, and yet the number of doctors that we have in this country in relation to the population is the lowest in the developed world.
That's right.
The lowest.
Right.
And, we're always being told, oh, no, we have a very good medical system, right? Not so.
Right. Right. So that information is, that information is really important.
Yeah.
Right. And so even though it may not be directly related to PFAS, right, it may be that you spend your time going from here to there, right?
Here,
Yeah.
person is like a truck.
That's right.
Yeah.
Go here, people. Go here. They don't even know what they're doing. They just do stuff so that the other organizations, get money.
Right. So part of this, right, is what is the response? What do you need? Right. We can't solve the medical dilemma here. But we can certainly incorporate your concerns as you write them. And you're not alone. Right. And so that's really important.
No, and the medical mystery tour, this constant medical mystery, like, oh, gee, what's wrong? And then go see 700. I had an orchestra of specialists and literally got to the point where the surgeon said, listen, it's more dangerous to do the surgery than it is to leave you like this. So call me when you can't live this way anymore. And that was my solution, right? So this is, we are in some stuff here. And the way to get out is to start assessing the situation, finding out what resources we need, and then asking for them in a way that helps us get them. And by having information from the survey, we can turn around to DPH, find out if they have a pulse,
Right.
and say, hey, our community needs some help. Listen, if they don't want me to rag on them, then they need to show up. That's what I have to say about DPH. Sir, please.
Before we got here. I don't know what, we don't know the sprinkling first. But it seems to me the focus of this is on the water. Is there any other way of being?
Yes, there are several ways. And in Westfield, the major way, right, we think is from consumption of the water. And that's why we've been talking mostly on the water, but there's evidence for diet, there's evidence for indoor air, there's evidence for,
The reason I'm asking, you may not, but there used to be a racetrack down the end of the runway.
Yep.
And I worked there for 15 years. And it was a dirt track, so it was very dusty.
oh, so you applied,
I mean, well, we watered the track. But, you know, you got the water.
Yep.
Which I assume was city water.
Yeah.
And you have the dust, which you were breathing.
so there is evidence. Yes, you're absolutely correct. And I think if you could include that information, right, in said survey, that would be very useful.
And I'm easily gonna look.
Yeah. Well, and
I'm sure you can.
there's PFAS in the air. ATSDR did some environmental testing. They found PFAS in air in Westfield. So there are a lot in medications and every asthma inhaler on the planet right now. Yeah, it's in a bunch of different things.
Right. Yep. Yeah.
It's in the medications too. Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess. I know you're going to continue.
No, we're actually almost done,
Well,
but go right ahead.
just based on that, we know there's multiple sources of PFAS now that we didn't know before. All that has been coming to light over the years because of other communities across the country too, who had their exposure in different way, like waterproofing or whatever boots.
Right.
Right, so that stuff got into the water. A lot of people got contaminated because of either air manufacturing that put smoke into the air and polluted the ground water that way too, or they were breathing. And of course, we concentrate more here on the water. And just read something, it might have been an article in
The New Yorker. Oh,
about the contamination here. People started to use in the early 70s.
mm-hmm.
So that doesn't mean there wasn't any PFAS before that, because there are other sources of PFAS. People know, and I'm sure everybody will probably at one point in time use non-stick pans. And it wasn't that too. I mean, and I don't know when those, so you're gonna ask, I saw it flash up there, people to do a survey and for us to go and talk to our neighbors, relatives and whatever, explain this whole thing to them. So one of the things that I can tell some people are going to ask, and somebody mentioned this earlier, some people don't want to know.
Yes.
Don't tell me that they are about that for all kinds of health things. They shouldn't be using this on their lawn, pesticide, because you know it's doing it to your animals, but you too. They're exposed to those contaminants. I have only seen 2 weeks. Well, to be or not to be, that's my question. But the thing is, what I'm saying is what they're going to ask. The purpose of this is to gather information, more information than the health study that has already been done. What do you expect this to reveal, this data? What
So
reveal and what will be done with it? And so people it's an answer to the surveys and everything. That might be, I know probably how I would explain to people, but have you explained to the people here?
So there,
Okay,
you want to
all
say
right,
that there was?
repeat the question so the
Okay.
people at home can hear.
Okay, so the question that was asked, it was prefaced by stating that there are people who don't want to know that there are multiple sources of PFAS. And the question, I believe, is you've already done, somebody's done a health study. What are you going to do with this information? How is this going to be helpful? And essentially, why should I participate?
Well, that's what they may ask.
Okay,
Right.
but clarification, no one has done a health study.
There has been no.
There has been no health study. There, an exposure assessment was performed on half the community, right? No health study has been done. And no survey of the concerns of the residents has been done. So nobody knows if the residents of Westfield have a higher rate of anything than others, except for what they already measure: childhood asthma, childhood lead, and heart attacks, right? The EJ metrics that they
Right.
keep. We don't know anything. So the reason to participate in this survey is to begin to wrap our brains around what it is people are dealing with. What are we dealing with? What stresses are we dealing with? What are you a private well owner and you still don't know if there's PFAS in your water? Like, are you a private well owner and you haven't heard anything about these regulations and what should be happening at your house? Are you worried about what your kids are drinking when they're at school? Are you worried, are you worried about what's in Westfield water? Do you feel like Westfield water's fine now because they have the filtration plants? What are the concerns? What are the concerns? We don't know how to help the most people if we don't know what the most people need help with.
That's what I'm happy about, because that's what I felt for a long time. Is that we presented the problem, we talked about it, and people know it's contaminated, and people have taken their stand. I don't care anymore. I don't think it's gonna bother me. I feel fine. But the education part of it, people don't know what they could or should be doing, or what the factors or things that are in their house that they're adding to the problem too. Because it's not just the water, it's the kinds of things they eat, furniture they have in the house, what they do for lawn care or whatever it is. So those are the things that hopefully will enlighten them a little bit. And then they make a decision about it. An informed decision. About
That's
what
right.
Need to do anything more about
That is right.
it. We can resolve their issue. I agree with everything.
Yes.
Yeah. So just to repeat, so can people hear? Did you type it in? Okay, so just so people can hear, Counselor Babinski is feeling relieved that we're going to start asking these questions because people knew that there was a problem, but they didn't have any actionable information to take action. They didn't know what to do to protect their families. They don't know what other sources of exposure are around. And so the education and the questions will help better inform our community and help people make better choices about, their daily lives, right? Because if you're worried about the water and you're buying a bunch of bottled water, but you're ironing 7,000 shirts a day with Scotch Guard, are you really reducing your PFAS exposure?
No.
No. So that roughly what you meant?
Education.
Yeah.
Yeah, little
Education.
education.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Sure. Oh, hold on. Yes, let me see. And then I'll unmute when we answer.
Okay, go ahead.
So if I understand right, you want to do a survey asking people health questions if they have any health issues and what they may be. So you're going to take that information and look for clusters. I mean, you're not going to know that it's PFAS unless you test the blood. So how is this going to, are you not opening up? Now they have to go get tested. And what if it's not PFAS? I mean, how are you going to narrow that survey down to where it's going to be PFAS that is the major cause of this cluster of illnesses?
Go ahead.
That question is right on, right? This is not an epidemiologic study, right? We are not going to be able to do this is associated with that, right? And epidemiology is just that, it's association. We can't say cause. So if we step back though, and we ask if people have these concerns, if we're focusing only on health, and they all happen to live in one area, right? And there's a common pattern, we're looking for patterns, right? If we have that kind of pattern association, we can begin, right, to compile that information and use that perhaps for additional work that might include, for example, would it be important for people in that area if you can overlay that area with where we knew there was high concentration in the water? Would it be useful for people to be recommended to have their serum levels determined? In which case, right? Or if they choose not to, what are ways to decrease their exposure now? So it's really about what information is needed for people to take action now. We can't go back, right? But we can go forward.
For example, Barb, remember a couple years ago, it was people in Westfield got really, really upset about their water bills. Remember, everyone got way off it. Jane remembers, right? The people went over the top about their water bills. What is going on with my water bill? What is going on? All right. So Jane and I are a couple of nerds. We decided to go and look at the data. What's going on with the water bill? And we looked at the data, and what we found was that the water bills that had this huge percent difference were all in this one area of town. And we found that people who had had their sprinklers on a timer for 10 years still had their water bill go up that much. And so we found out, gee, is it the new meters or is it not the new meters? So we looked at the numbers. Turns out it wasn't the new meter. But when we found out that it was all in this one area, we started talking to DPW. There's a pumping station over there. So they were going through more water because the force of the water coming out of the faucets was higher. So when they had their sprinklers on for a certain period of time, dozens more gallons were going through because the pressure was so high. So they put some regulators on, their water bill went back down. But if we hadn't looked at the data and taken the survey, we wouldn't have found the cause of the problem. And was the problem the meters? No, it wasn't. But we found the cause. We're looking to collect the information. When we get the information and we notice that this particular part of town has a high water bill or medical bill, or use my analogy in another way, right? When we find areas of interest, then we can sort of pull it out and see, okay, what's interesting there? What do these people have in common? What do they not have in common, right? And if you want to look at a study, then you take that information and you go to a funding source like NIH and you say, here is this cluster of interesting stuff. Please give us some money so we can find out what's going on. And so that's why, because if no one will give us the money we need to do the big health study, because we weren't that lucky, it went to other people, then we're going to take that big work down and we're breaking it into the smallest bite-sized pieces. And this is piece number 1. Go ahead.
Teflon pans have PFAS in them.
You should bring up that one slide that you had at the very beginning so she can see it, because she missed that whole slide.
Yes.
Yes.
All right, don't look, people, it's going fast.
No, this is an answer to Barb. There's very few people in the world that they say you can find that don't have PFAS in their blood.
There you go.
So there's everybody, usually most people tested globally will have PFAS in their blood.
Yeah, I've never heard of anybody not.
I know.
Yeah, no, I would think it would go around.
So what you're talking about is the level
Yeah.
of PFAS, because there's gonna be heavier concentrations.
or the level of
explained,
illnesses.
if you are somewhere where there was a high concentration of use, Michigan, those were, is it Wolverine?
Wolverines.
They had where they, did the, waterproofing of their boots and clothing and whatever. And they were contaminating a whole area of people. There were high concentrations of PFAS in well water there. It's astounding the amount of PFAS that some of those
Oh,
communities
Sandy's house, yeah.
had. So that's what they're gonna try to look at here by doing the study and trying to pinpoint areas that may have more or less, because everybody's gonna have some, but.
But you don't know what if their illness is because of the PFAS
Nope.
without testing.
That's very hard to determine. There
That's
are
what I'm
people
saying.
that can eat certain kinds of food and be fine, and then others, have a reaction to it, so,
But what I
It's like
understand,
Vortex.
yes.
Yes?
Yes.
They live on them.
Yes.
Yeah, so to answer the question that was asked, the question that was asked was, oh, yeah, see, yeah, look right up there. So the question, how do we end up associating, right? That is a health study, and that's later down the line.
This is basically groundwork in order to get more funding, find out.
Yes.
That is correct. This is if you were baking a cake, this is making your ingredient list that you have to go to the store with. Right? This is finding out who wants what kind of cake so I can make my shopping list. Like we're not even to the point of baking or lighting candles.
Is anyone eligible to take this study?
The survey?
Survey?
Yes.
Not just for the people that tested.
No.
No,
It-
everybody. If you worked here, if you lived here, if you had 6 generations of your family here, you were born and breastfed here, and then you moved away, it counts for you too, right? That anyone who consumed the water, lived in town, or consumed it through breast milk or cord blood or what placenta comes through. Yeah.
Do you know what the range was of the people that were tested in this field? What could it be?
Do we know the range? You mean the blood range?
Yeah, the
Yes. From the ATSDR.
Yeah, the values of the blood for ATSDR. Yeah.
So the question is it known what the range of PFAS is from the ATSDR study for Westfield?
This one?
You want to talk about the slide?
So these are age adjusted. So the green bar up at the top is your NHANES number for 2015 and 2016. That is the national survey, right? Of all the random people that they take NHANES data for in America. That's the numbers of PFOS, PFHXS. That was in their blood, right? The average. So our averages are in the gray and the dark blue, right? So particularly my particular PFAS of interest is PFHXS. It has a very long lifetime in your body. I think the thing that I found was the half-life of 35 years. I can't even deal with that. Right? So the half-life is the amount of time it takes for a chemical to reduce in your body by half its concentration. Okay, so right now, if my PFHXS is say 6, in 35 years, it could be 3. It sticks around a long time. And for some people, it sticks around even longer. So these are our numbers, and they went from being non-detect, which as we know from Wendy is not 0. Thanks so much for saying that here. I feel so vindicated. I feel so vindicated. So what you can see is that a lot of us had more than the average American. A lot of us did. And some of us had super high numbers and they were outliers, and some of us did not. When our meetings move forward, we will be showing you more of Westfield's data and giving you the story of why you don't see it all now. But that's a story for another day.
The second one is there.
Yeah.
Where does that come from? Where does that?
Can you repeat the question?
The second on the list,
That's HSS.
it's from firefighting foam.
And it's you, what I.
Go ahead.
So I worked in a research lab that did the chemical characterization of the firefighting, one type of firefighting foam and its toxicity. We found hundreds of different types of PFAS, but the two most prevalent was PFOS and PFHXS. So basically, the same chemicals that you're finding in your blood have the similar fingerprints that the firefighting foam has. And that's how Westfield has been able to say that our blood levels are linked to the activities that happened right at the end of that runway.
Because it,
Drinking down of water. We've lived on the same place here.
so the question on the floor is, how could I have been drinking the water this long and I'm still living? That's the question. That's the question. And do you want to talk about?
Well, that is the question, right? And part of the response to that is these molecules, as Kristen showed you, behave similarly in, at least in some systems, to molecules that are already in our bodies. And they work on signaling and they work on sort of different pathways. And they don't behave exactly the same way in everybody. And so why don't they kill us is the question, honestly, that industry has been touting, which is they're really not that toxic. But in fact, they are. And the studies that show that are animal models and human epidemiologic studies. And you were going to tell me to talk about the C8 study, if it's relevant or not. But to answer the question, why are you, can't even say it, why are you here able to be with us today and ask that really important question, right? We don't know. Although, you know, there are people who better eliminate some of these chemicals. We're not all the same. And it may be that other parts of your life, you're actually doing health protective behaviors. And so we just don't know.
Right. And also the different exposures, you know, based on genetics and lifestyle, like it's everybody's going to express differently the PFAS and how it affects us. Right. And timing is a lot, especially with the endocrine disruptors. So
What does that mean?
well, what it means is these are, you know how people don't drink, they sell baby bottles that say BPA free, right? No bisphenol A, right? That because those kinds of plastics and plasticizers are called endocrine disruptors, which means they confuse your body like hormones, right? And PFAS are endocrine disruptors, many of them. Some are immune system toxicants too. And so when you are in a hormonally active stage of life, like babies and toddlers and teenagers and gestational women, or me in my perimenopause, right? Whenever I'm yelling at the DOD or the EPA, I tell them, if you didn't want me to yell at you, you shouldn't have pumped me full of endocrine disruptors and then talked to me about it during perimenopause. It's your own damn fault, right? So that when we're in an endocrine important stage, when we're in a developmentally hormonally active stage, they rear their heads. So
When are you putting together the survey and when
Will it be available for people?
we are putting together the survey in constant
now?
conversation. Yes. And I mean, what, 700 times a day we talk? It's
It will be this summer.
coming out this summer.
And we have to go through you have to go through the hurdles of the academic sort of the rules. And so
Yeah.
August, probably August.
Yeah. Because
Realistically.
when you deal with humans, you have to make sure that you follow all the rules and everything is by the book, right? We do not want to mess up anything. So we have to follow all the rules carefully.
And you said you had a year, you have a year from February to complete it?
A year from March.
Yeah.
Yep.
Timing is important. I'm guessing at the end of the summer, August, September is
People
Yeah.
don't care
about all that stuff during the summer. It's a
don't.
great time.
The vacations and everything, they're
The minds are other places, as ours should be, probably. Enjoying the nice weather. So
So what we might,
timing of
Right.
when you put it out there is whether people will pay attention to it.
so often what we do is we open a survey and we set, here's a number, the number of people we would really like to have enrolled, right? And we might then keep it open till that number enrolls, right? And then perhaps close it. And you're absolutely right. September will probably be the time that most of the data come in, which is fine.
Right.
Yeah.
And so if we can get the survey put together in a draft form by the middle of July
Yeah.
and make sure that, right, because putting it into Qualtrics is not right. You have to check it and make sure and then try it out and then go back and make sure everything is spelled correctly and that all the data is going in the right place. There is a lot to check. Right. And so if we can get that moving and then say August, do a soft rollout and then make a big announcement, everybody's back in town, everybody's talking about it. You're at the farmer's market, there's a pumpkin fest. You do all the events, you make sure everybody knows, and then you close it up and do your analysis over the winter.
It will not take that long. No, it won't take that long. When we do a Qualtrics survey, it's all downloaded sort of immediately. And then Ani Bello and others, the statistical gurus, will work with Kristen, to get that done.
Follow up with question. You said that supposedly our water was fixed, but nothing.
Our water has been filtered.
So I'll respond. I think I can respond I don't know all the particulars. Yeah, well, I think, yeah. So filtration, the type of filtration that's done, right, is expensive and it has to be, the filter has to be changed out and it doesn't catch all of the PFAS, right? So would you say it's better than it was?
The water in Westfield has never been better than it is right now.
There we go.
You could say that I can say. I still filter mine with a reverse osmosis filter. Yes, I do.
Clarify too, there's a requirement.
Yes.
About which set of PFAS
That is
you are
Correct.
required as a city to.
That's correct. For the people at home, Marianne Babinski's talking about the Massachusetts MCLs.
So you're gonna get different perspectives on that. All of this together, everybody has an opinion about it. That's why they're collecting data.
Yep.
Because you can say you believe this, that, or the other thing, but it's better you get information that's more concrete, I think.
Right.
And I think,
Help you
right.
make decisions that help you make decisions.
Well, and
I think
Yeah.
we owe that. to
so we know that some of the PFAS we don't talk about are toxic. We know that. He knows that. He studied it in the lab. We know. Okay. We know that some of the PFAS that we don't report about are toxic. We know that those PFAS aren't filtered by GAC filtration. We know that those PFAS were in the raw water. That's why I don't drink it. Now, other people make their choices. Some people smoke cigarettes. I do not, right? So everyone has to make their own informed choices. When you take water out of the tap in Westfield, it meets the federal and state requirements,
Okay.
except for certain, disinfection byproduct issues. It generally speaking meets the requirements for the state and federal regulations. It is not possible to regulate communities out of sanitation. That is a bad idea. So the regulations that we have for PFAS are not based on health. They are based on as low as we can go and still allow people to flush toilets and not end up in a sanitation disaster. Right? So we can't make the limits completely protective of health, or no one would be able to flush a toilet and we wouldn't be protecting our health, right? So there's a trade-off. In order to have sanitation, you accept a certain amount of PFAS in your water. And if you don't want to accept that amount of PFAS, you get a reverse osmosis filter. Go ahead, Marianne.
Yes. And that's what all this conversation is about, is importance, because you have to be careful what you say. I mean, the wells we have are being, the water is being treated, not be taking everything out, as you said, that you would like to take it. But some of the information, education to me, again, is an important piece here, is because if we're driving people to get, they didn't want to pay for higher prices on water in their water bill, but they will pay, bragged about paying 30 something, 40 something, 60 something dollars a month to have water delivered to their house, that they don't know whether it has PFAS in it or not, because they're not checking that. Nobody's verifying. Up on the website, try to get bottling companies, water bottling companies to list what's in their water so that people would feel safe. Go to their website, check this water.
Right.
Is PFAS free.
So let me just, for the people at home, Counselor Babinski is mentioning that in order to save themselves from PFAS, people will buy a bunch of bottled water, but not check whether or not there's PFAS or other contaminants in that bottled water. And that when Mass DEP tried to ask people about the PFAS in their bottled water, it was a voluntary program, and it didn't go so well. In fact, New Hampshire was the one who put out information about the PFAS in bottled water. And actually, we all relied on that for a long time, which is weird because usually New Hampshire is not at the front of these things. But I was grateful that they offered it. But yes, you're exactly right. And thank you for bringing it up, because if we don't know what's in the bottled water, and, you know, newsflash, those bottles are made of plastic. So guess what they're made of, right? So these are things we need to think about, need to talk about, and need to get educated about. You're absolutely right.
My attitude was, after 53 years, what difference is it going to make for a few more years?
For you and
when we moved to Westfield in 1971, we were told how great drinking water was, and it's always tasted excellent.
yeah, PFAS are odorless and colorless, right? Tasteless too. And it is possible that at one point we did have terrific water, but wells 7 and 8, which are over there, weren't drilled until 77. They were using the PFAS before then. So I don't know that wells.
We weren't looking.
Yeah,
Looking.
I don't know that 7 and 8 were ever clean.
Were they drinking?
Well, there's a that water is pulled out of the ground and then put through filters and then put into distribution. So it's definitely cleaner than the groundwater is by itself. But everybody has to make their own personal decision. And I'm with you. At this point in my life, is me not drinking PFAS going to help? I don't know. But the kids in my house, right? And everybody coming up behind me and everybody else in town, right? If back in 2016, I could have just bought an RO filter, kept my mouth shut, and not gotten in any trouble. I didn't have to talk to Marianne. I didn't have to go to DEP or let those people in my house. I am not a group person. I do not want to be a group people, right? I'm all by myself, chemist in the lab person, right? I'm not a leader of things. I'm a chemist, right? But I couldn't sleep at night because nobody was talking about it and people were just drinking it. And they were like, what does it matter? Oh, the EPA says only 70, so I'm going to drink it up to 69 parts per trillion. Well, now the EPA is saying 4 parts per quadrillion, right? This is a big deal. So at some point, you realize that you're the grown-up in the room that has to do something about it. And even though it's not going to save me and you, and it's not going to change the masses in my body or the 1.5 lungs or the immune system compromise, it's not going to change that for me, but we can change it for everybody else. And for the people who say, when the chemical companies say, it doesn't matter, look at all those people are still alive. No, nothing's wrong. Nobody's doing anything. You know why I think we didn't get a health study here? I think we didn't get a health study here because they'd find stuff here. I think we didn't get a health study here because here is where the information is, because half the town was dosed higher than the other half. And so the science is here. And that's why they don't want to look. And that's why I'm not shutting up. And that's why he's not shutting up. And the fact that there are other people who will sit down and shut up when they say, no, we have our experts, you trust them. No, I'm going to go out of town and get another one. And another 5 and another 10 after that. Because this is not right. We were poisoned for decades. We're asking the survey so that we can help get some recovery here. That's all. It's not going to help me and you. It's going to help everybody else. But thank you for asking. And it is sad that it's not going to help me and you because we're done, me and you. But it's going to help everybody else. Yes, we do. We have a list of people to thank. We're just in the question section, like we skipped acknowledgements. Here are our acknowledgements. We have a bazillion allies and academic partners. We have co-conspirators. Thanks for adding that, Chris. We have political friends, nonprofit leaders, including Mary Ann Babinski sitting right there, right? Who got me into this mess. Now, you know, were you not sitting at my table telling me I had to go talk to the mayor and the city council? This is your fault. See? All right. And Mary O'Connell, who has driven back and forth to Boston a zillion times with our crazy crew. All of you guys, all of our residents, the fellow rafters, some of whom are out in the open and some of whom have never made their names public because we used to get attacked and threatened to be sued. Remember those days? All our other PFAS advocates from all across the country, all our researchers, our scientists, their students, the non-governmental organizations and reporters who keep shining the light on, and public records officers who are doing the yeoman's work here. I will tell you, the records people at DEP are fantastic. And that poor lady in the city of Westfield, that she has answered more of my emails than even you, Wendy. She has really. Our state rep and senator are fantastic. Some of our city councilors are very fantastic. Not all. We're going to get the rest of you on board. Representative Richard Neal, Senators Warren and Markey have been fantastic on PFAS. They have always backed us up, and we appreciate them and their legislative aides because we know those aides are the ones doing most of the work, right? We appreciate UMass Amherst. We appreciate Chris for taking them and bringing them on board and getting them some AFFF and dragging them into this fight. We appreciate UMass Lowell for also being willingly dragged into the fight too. And Notre Dame, where Graham Peasley is, who also answers a zillion emails from me too. We appreciate Mass DEP. We appreciate their records when other people didn't keep them. We would like them to fix their database. We're going to work on that. We appreciate Turi. We appreciate ATSDR. We're going to pull asterisks after that. We'll talk about that at the next meeting. We appreciate NASM and the Interstate Technology Regulatory Council, which, if you don't know, is where the PFAS nerds put the information. And we appreciate the EPA. We know they can do better. They can always do better, but we appreciate the work they're trying to do. And we already did the question part, but if there are any other questions, we're happy to take them. And if there are any in the chat, Chris, what have we got in anything? Oh, you're welcome, guys. Thank you for coming in. And people, this will be recorded. It has been recorded. We will post it online. We will post the form and a link to the Google form on the event website so that everyone can give us their feedback. If you liked the room, if you hated the room, if you think we talked too long, all that stuff. Yes, please. And also, if we could just take a minute, can we please thank Wendy for driving all the way out here? We appreciate you. We very much appreciate you. Thank you so much.
So we're not going to give you information now.
No, we don't need it right now. We can, if you need to contact us, we'll make sure you have our email so that you have access to everything and know where everything is posted. Okay?
Is this a national organization or
WRAFT. WRAFT is Westfield residents advocating for themselves. It's just us.
That's what we're here right now. But it's not yet.
Yeah, right. It's yeah, a fair amount of us are in here right now. It's true. All right. So thank you everyone. If there aren't any Zoom questions, I will close up the Zoom. We appreciate you all for coming and stay tuned for the survey, okay? We'll see you more this summer.